Hi everyone, my name's Darryl Panes, CEO at As Good as Gold Australia, and today once again I'm joined by my brother Brian and partner at As Good as Gold, and today we have the privilege of interviewing Bill Murphy. Bill is the co-founder, chairman and director of GATA. GATA being the Gold Antitrust Action Committee at gata.org. Good evening, Bill.
Well, thanks for thinking of me, and thanks for staying up so late to talk to me.
Talk about late. I said good evening, Bill, but it's almost good night here at the moment. It is 11:30 or thereabouts, but so we're just about finishing the day, and you're just about to start. So, but we made it work anyway. Okay, what I think our viewers would love to hear, and I certainly would, I'd like to know what Bill Murphy was doing prior to GATA. So what was it that enticed Bill Murphy to take an interest in what he does right now at GATA? Was there anyone specifically that led you into making this journey, or how did it take place? So I'd like to know where it all started.
I have an extensive background in commodity trading. At one point, I was the biggest trader in copper way back when. I wish I'd kept all my winnings, but very familiar with the metals markets, gold and silver. And way back when, I helped Ray Dalio of Bridgewater Associates, the largest hedge guy in the world, get his business going when he needed some help. So I was down and helped him there, and was in the commodity business for 25 years, and then got out and was working with a guy named Frank Venerosa, who was very well known in the financial world back then, and very, very highly regarded. And working with him, I realized that the internet, this was 1999, was going to take off and be a big deal. And I felt I could get on the internet and had a lot to say about the gold and silver markets, and started writing a commentary in September of 1998, actually. And then after a couple of weeks, long-term capital management blew up, and I realized that the bullion banks, or certain banks, I heard their names, and I was familiar with some players that told me what was going on, were capping the market around $300. And I said, this thing is rigged. And so I started complaining about it in my daily commentary at lametropolecafe.com, which I do every day. I've done it since then. And a fellow follower named Chris Powell, who's the editor of a daily newspaper in the United States, says, I'm tired of you complaining about it. Let's do something about it. And so in January of 1999, we formed GATA. And we realized initially that it was the bullion banks, but then we realized it was much bigger, that it involved central banks, and the U.S. government, and the Bank for International Settlements. And so it's gone on from there, and we've been at it ever since.
Right. Okay. Look, I mean, there's a story behind all of us, of course. I mean, in our situation, Brian and I met a gentleman who turned our life around, basically. We knew nothing about the industry. Even though I thought I was reasonably street smart, but I sat down with a gentleman who educated me on the monetary system, the banking system, and I thought, wow, I need to know this stuff if I'm going to progress in life. And that's what transpired. We had an engineering business, manufacturing for 30 years. We were a major exporter to numerous companies around the world. But as you would know, in Australia, the automotive industry is at zero at the moment. We produce no motor cars. And so Brian and I picked up on what we'd learned from Peter Daniels and thought we need to educate, not expand our own education, but we need to educate other people as well. It's vital. So right now, I feel pretty good about it. And look, I admire your commitment to the industry. I really do. And we read your material all the time, and hence the interview this evening. But I've got a question. We've got a number of questions we really want to ask you. Talking about JP Morgan keeps on coming up in conversation all the time, of this massive hoard of silver that they have at the moment. And it varies, but it's somewhere, I believe, between 700 million, 800 million ounces. And they've achieved that by shorting the market, other methods. Andrew McLeod, his theory is that sovereign China has been buying from JP Morgan because of the huge demand that they have in China for industrial silver for industrial purposes. Question, I guess, is what understanding do you have of JP Morgan and this huge hoard of silver? Is it theirs, or could it be China's? What are your thoughts on this at the moment?
Well, you can't have a more mysterious market. You've got Ted Butler saying one thing and Alistair saying something else, and nobody really knows. What we do know, yes, that JP Morgan has a lot of silver. Is it theirs? Is it China's? But the one thing I follow is how the market trades, what it does. And JP Morgan and the rest of the gold cartel that they have involved with them have never been more aggressive selling the silver market. And that started a number of years ago. And it's scary because in 2010, when silver ran up to 50, the open interest in the COMEX, the number of longs and shorts, was 135,000 contracts all the way up. Now it's 233,000 contracts, and the price piddly, $16 an ounce. So these are what I call the bad guys and these bullion dealers going all out to keep the silver price under control. And they're as aggressive as ever right now. There's no sign of any change. I mean, can you imagine if all of a sudden JP Morgan and allies bought 100,000 contracts at the market? You have the price go up $20. Who would sell?
Yeah. So how long does it continue? How long can they continue to do this? I mean, until they can't? Is that the answer?
Well, there's something called a commercial signal failure, which is rare, but that's when these commercials, and a lot of it's the gold cartel, as I would call it, this group I mentioned, where they just get blown out of the water. And I think we are in process of that right now. It was very obvious to me and some colleagues a couple months ago that the way gold was trading in the United States, which is far lagging that in Australia, began to trade totally differently. All of a sudden, all dips were bought. The bad guys would attack, boom, the market would come right back the next day or a day later. This didn't go on for 6 years when gold was kept in a cage.
Yeah.
And then gradually it's broken out of its base. So my opinion is it's the physical market, to answer your question, is taking on the gold cartel and their ability to come up with enough physical gold to match their selling in the paper market. So they had a big problem. And that's why gold in dollar terms has gone from 1280 to 1440 in a couple of months.
So the market itself, once the market gets a grip of this, if the market decides, the big players in the open market decide that that gold is a good thing or silver is a good thing, are we saying that they have more influence than, say, the JP Morgans of this world, once the market is behind it?
Well, getting back to what I just mentioned, so gold's been on its way because the physical market is creating a very tough time for these bad guys that I call the gold cartel. My feeling all along would be that all of a sudden, as the gold price takes off, investors will want to go after cheap silver because it's, at a ratio recently, it just come down. Yeah. It's 94 to 1 in the U.S. So that would all of a sudden follow suit, and the supply of silver that's presently available would suddenly dry up as the people that need to buy it would make sure they could get it at a decent price. And I think we've seen the beginning of that right now. Silver finally, in dollar terms, after just doing nothing for, the last 3 or 4 years, especially, finally, began to break out.
Yeah. Look, talking about manipulation, it comes up a lot. I was only thinking the other night, imagine this, you're watching, I presume it's the same in the United States, but over here, if you're watching the news, it is on every night of the week, of course, and there's about a 2-minute segment on finance, but they will promote the heck out of real estate or the All Ords if there is a positive move from either of those two markets. Can you imagine what would happen if they announced the fact that, in Australia at least, that gold was at its highest price in recorded history at over $2,000 an ounce? What would actually happen? I'm anticipating that there would be an enormous demand. Our phones would run hot. Everyone would want to buy gold. Would you agree with that?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the way the investment world is. And
Yeah.
mentioned earlier, we got a problem in the United States because the gold price has been so low and the silver price ridiculous for so long, with other assets soaring. The gold and silver industry in the United States has never been in a worse shape.
Yeah, yeah. Look, I think it reaches, here's what I believe happens, and I'm seeing it happen now. I had a conversation the other day with an airline pilot. It works for one of the major airlines, and I've talked for hours, as I'm sure you have, about this particular industry. And I think in 2 minutes, this man explained to me how so many people are thinking at the moment. He said, Darryl, I have a group of friends and we collect on a Saturday night and we talk about the economy. And he said, this is what we have concluded. A husband, wife with 2 children living just outside of the CBD in Sydney buy a house. $1.5 million is a median, he said, a median property. So we're not talking a palace, we're talking median property just outside of the CBD. 2 cars in the drive, 2 children going to private school. Not the best school and not the best cars, just a good private school and 2 okay cars. He asked me the question, Bill, with all of the other costs that we all understand are there, how much do you think somebody in Sydney in that position would need to earn to be able to cover those expenses and just have a little bit left over at the end of the day? I said about 350,000 gross. He said not enough. Somewhere between 550 and 600,000 gross to generate that sort of a lifestyle. So I then said to him, but no one earns that sort of money. He said, that's right. So that's the position we're in at the moment in Australia. And so he is saying, and his friends are saying, what do I do to protect my wealth? And historically, of course, as you and I both know, gold and silver answer that question. So that's where we are at the moment. And I don't think it matters how heavily you manipulate a market. When people start to recognise the position they're in, they start to think about it and say, there's something terribly wrong and I need to make some different decisions. You agree with that?
Absolutely, and I think that's what's gradually kicking in with the bigger money here in the United States. There's a dichotomy between people, what the establishment says, how great everything is with the economy and the stock market and all this sort of thing. And then is what you're talking about. The average person in the United States is not getting anywhere.
Yeah.
And the situation is getting demonstrably worse, more noticeable. Now you got, interest rates going to zero and sub-zero all over the world.
Yeah.
People go, well, what's going on here? And the conclusion is that they're going to have to keep interest rates low. We can't raise them much in the United States. It would be a disaster.
Yeah.
And they're going to go to more, the budget's going up, debt's going up. It's going to be more money printing. And all of a sudden, if I'm right, now they don't have the physical gold anymore to keep the price from exploding.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, you're right on the button there. You mentioned in your past history the name of Ray Dalio. My next question I have for you. Ray Dalio has been in the news very recently stating that the world is heading for a paradigm shift and gold will be the beneficiary. He has always maintained, as long as I've been listening to him, a 10% holding in gold. Now, do you believe a 10% holding in gold is good enough for the general public? I don't, because I did listen to a video about 12 months ago put out by Jeffrey Christian, David Morgan, and they were saying the optimum portfolio is around the 25% precious metals. What do you think?
I'm more in favor of that, but I'm prejudiced, of course, for so, I think we've got some moves coming. They're going to be spectacular in gold and silver. And our time has come for both of the precious metals. And I think it's going to be breathtaking in terms of what it's going to do in dollar terms. You're already on your way, but we're just starting.
Yeah. Look at, Ray Dalio, the way I see it with Ray is that he's worth about 18 billion, and if he's got 10% in gold, that's 1.8, and that should cover anything that falters in his portfolio. Okay, I'm going to move on to another question for you. In one of your latest audios, it was about a week ago, I was listening to you. You mentioned that the bullion or corn shops in the United States are being kept busy with buybacks. Now, can you share with us why this is the case, especially that the opposite here in Australia is happening? We are being inundated with new orders. So the only thing I can put it down to is that we haven't had a recession, right? So people have got more money to spend, right? But they are getting worried. Whereas in the United States, they're starting to run out of money and they're starting to use their gold and silver to put food on the table. What's your feeling?
Well, my take is a little bit different in the sense that the stock market, has been soaring. Just the other day, the S&P and NASDAQ made all-time highs. Other assets have been soaring, and gold and silver have gone nowhere in the United States for so long that people see a little pop here and they go, oh, now I can finally get some money out of this. And so they're selling. They're not looking at the big picture. They don't see it yet. Gold and silver are still on the back burner. I think it's going to change dramatically over the next year, but that's why the little guy is dumping so much so that there's no premiums in the coins.
Yeah. Yep. Look, I mean, that could be right. I mean, in Australia, we went past the best price we've ever had about 6 months ago. So we're at around about Australian dollars, $2,100 an ounce, and it's really starting to fire up, and the interest is unbelievable at the moment.
Oh yeah. Look, I mean, sorry, Bill. I think it gets down really to the fact that we haven't had a major downturn.
No.
You've really got to go back to the Great Depression. And I don't know anyone who was alive in the Great Depression. So, we are the lucky country. But sometimes that can place you in a very vulnerable position, which is where I believe we are now.
Yep.
But this time, we're not going to have China to save us. We were very, very fortunate last time, and we just didn't get hit at all, did we?
No, we came out of it very well.
Yeah. But because of that, and this time it looks a little different, or it looks quite a bit different, typical of what the airline pilot was talking about just recently, we've had this huge interest in precious metals. The phones are running absolutely hot at the moment. So it'll be interesting to watch how America reacts over the next few months, because I'm anticipating we're just going to have a breakout here in Australia. The interest in precious metals will just continue to exceed, I think, all expectations. I have a question for you. It gets back to silver again. Just recently, we know that there's been this extended period of time where we've had this ratio that has been completely out of whack. So 93 to 1, crazy. We know historically still that ratio never holds over 80 to 1 for a very lengthy period of time, but it has on this occasion. So, but just recently, we're just talking, as you would know, the last 2 or 3 weeks, that ratio has closed into around 86 to 1. It closed into 37 to 1 in 2011. Do you think that this can happen again, especially when you speak to people like Keith Neumeyer, who say the miners can't dig it out the ground at any better than the 9 to 1 ratio to gold? So what are your thoughts there? Do you think we can do this again? Do you think it'll go to 37 to 1? Do you think it can have that massive adjustment again?
Well, I'm a big fan of Newton's law on equal and opposite reactions, and silver has been the worst market, having followed commodities and traded extensively over many years. I've never seen a market act worse than silver. It's at times, until recently, it didn't even trade. It would open up and just sit there like a potted plant.
Correct. Yeah.
I do believe, yes, that when as gold takes off, and silver's first of all got to get above 1750 in dollar terms, but the real key will be 21. If it gets above that, I think it will go bonkers, because you have a base that's been built with a lot of power in it for, especially the last 4 years, but it's been in a bear market for over 8 years. And I think when it starts to go this time, all of a sudden there'll be physical silver available, and then all of a sudden it'll be gone. It'll dry up as everybody goes at once to secure supply, especially those in industry that need it. So I'm looking for silver to take out 50, which, geez, it hit that almost 40 years ago, and then head for 100.
Right. Well, Keith Newmeyer, of course, talks $200. Pretty smart man. And, of course, Jim Sinclair refers to silver as gold on steroids. Both very smart individuals. So I think you're right. I think we're in for a very explosive period.
We have this next question I've got. We have talked about in this interview, not only slightly, but it's a question that I find it very hard to come to grips with, and this is how I explain it. From where I sit, the trading of commodities on the COMEX seems illegal. To me, it does. There's no common sense in it at all. But because I've tried trading, because if I tried trading a product that I didn't own or I didn't hold, I'd go to jail. So could you explain what legalities are there behind this, and how they get away with it, how the bullion banks get away with contracts that there's no metal backing behind it?
Well, it's called naked shorting, but I mean, in general, their positions, what makes it so egregious is that they're so large, it's way beyond what would be done in any other prudent industry. So they just sell whatever they want in the paper market to suppress the price. This goes back to my talk about the gold cartel and so on.
Yeah.
And from my opinion, part of it is the reason they get away with it is the government's behind it. This is what most people don't really understand. It's legal for the government to do what they want to do, according to the Exchange Stabilization Fund. So they just do it and don't talk about it. As my colleague Chris Powell says, the U.S. government would rather reveal its nuclear secrets than what it's doing in gold and silver. What makes it illegal is that nobody knows what they're doing, and they won't admit it, and they'll never talk about it, and to get away with all this price suppression. And that is what is completely outrageous, and it's the reason our Commodity Futures Trading Commission doesn't do anything. It's part of the government. It's like there's no sheriff in town. Lawless. And that's why it's going to take these physical markets to blow the bad guys up, which I think we're in process of now. And it's going to be very interesting to see how it plays out, because as I mentioned, the open interest before and JP Morgan's big short position, how can silver ever go up in my lifetime with them so short? I mean, it's kind of mind-boggling. So the only thing I can figure out is that, the physical gold market takes off, then the physical silver market dries up, and they just get blown over finally lose a trade after 8 years.
Yes, look, I agree with you. And one thing that says to me is that the physical silver market has to do a change here, because when you think about all the new inventions that are coming to us in the world today, everything's electronic. Everything has got silver in it. There isn't anything that's invented out there today that hasn't got a reasonable amount of silver in it. And now you're talking about electric cars, which have 3-4 times the amount of silver in it than a combustion car. So yes, I think the physical market will take over, and I agree with you wholeheartedly. I'm going to move over to the next question, and we're coming to the end anyway. But we met Jim Rickards in Australia. We brought him over here to speak at our seminar. But you often hear him mention that for a long while that the US, to maintain its position as leader in the world market, it would have to revalue the price of gold to US $10,000 an ounce. Now others are saying that at least 10,000 or more to back its currency. Do you believe that if this could happen, would it take place very quickly, or take several years, if at all? And where do you think the price of silver would be under a $10,000 US gold price?
Well, Jim's a smart guy. He was a speaker at a conference that we had in 2011 in London, and it's a pleasure meeting him, having him there. It's hard to say. What I can't understand how these things can happen with the bullion banks and this gold cartel, as I call it, so short in the futures market. We're talking about, if something like that were to happen overnight, the losses would be catastrophic beyond comprehension. I don't know how any financial market in the U.S. could survive, in the sense that they're all related. The bond market, the stock market, they're all under the same umbrella with gold and silver. I mean, think of the losses for the shorts. I mean, so I don't know how that can play out unless somehow the word gets out first and they're allowed to cover the short positions in the futures market before something official was done. So I would think would have to have some sort of maniac rally on the upside before any announcement was made.
Hey, very interesting. Look, I'm of the opinion, because Jim was basing his $10,000 an ounce at 40% backing. So you can well imagine if it was 100% backing, but that would never happen. But it is incredible that with the $10,000 an ounce, that which would be about 13,000 here in Australia. Just as a byproduct of that question, we came from the automotive industry, Darryl and myself, and I've on a number of seminars that we do, we state the price of a motor car in dollars, which would be Australian dollars, and we price it in gold. And you know what? In gold, the Australian motor car industry was stable between 1985 right through to now, between 23 ounces of gold to 27 ounces for the cost of a motor car. Never altered. And you could go back to the Model T Ford of 1908, and it ranged between 18 ounces and 23 ounces if you priced your motor car in gold. So I don't know what people are thinking. I think gold is the way to go, but let's hope Jim Rickards is correct. But let's hope we go back to a gold standard, because it's the only way I can see that we can move ahead.
Well, I'll tell you what, governments have done a remarkable job in keeping people in the dark about gold. Right now, there is a play on in Adelaide. It's called the Book of Mormon, and everyone wants a seat. And they talk about it being the gold standard of comedy. Gold standard of comedy. Tony Robbins, everyone's heard of Tony Robbins, the great motivator, and Dean Graziosi. They talk about the gold standard training program. Gold standard. Scott Cam does a program over here. It's a home renovation program. They talk about the gold standard renovation. So what does gold standard mean? As soon as you mention gold to anybody, they visualize somebody who's rich. If you knew the person next door had a lot of gold, you'd say they're rich. Kings and queens who own gold, they're rich. And yet nobody owns it. And so I have a lot of fun with this, because I say to people, I share that with them, and I say, well, so if it means or it represents wealth, why wouldn't you have some? I'm amazed that it continues to go under the radar, completely unnoticed. And here's the point. Since 2002 through till now, 17, 18 years, we've had gold that has provided in US dollars a return of 12% per year on year, 12%. I mean, that's better than real estate. That's better than the stock market, and it's right up there with real estate. No costs attached, no maintenance, no stamp duty, no council rates, no nothing. And yet it continually goes under the radar. And then we've got guys like Jim Sinclair who say, if you want to get wealthy, just do what the central banks of the world do. Hold gold. Just become your own central bank. Do what they do. And so I think the governments and the manipulators have done a wonderful job. But I think now we've reached a point, I really believe we've reached a point where people are looking around and they're saying, hey, there is something terribly wrong here. I can't get a return on my deposit in the bank. I'm not going to invest in real estate. Stock market is extremely volatile. What's left? And gold comes to mind. And so I think that's where we are at the moment. I think that Jim Rickards is correct. I think that gold will go to 10. I'm sure there'll be a reset. We have to do something. Any closing comments from you at all at the moment, Bill?
Yeah, well, first of all, thanks for all you do, and you're sharp guys, and appreciate being on the show. And in terms of what gold and silver are going to do, I agree. I think the gold market is just beginning to explode. Silver is going to lag and then catch up out of nowhere, as they said, when it gets above 21. It's going to be a tremendous investment opportunity that people are willing to pay attention and take action on. And it's the same thing. The bad guys got to be defeated because, as Paul Volcker said, who was a former Fed chairman here many years ago, when he looks at gold, up is bad and down is good. Because if you think of the United States, if all of a sudden gold was up $150, what would the thing be? Oh, what's wrong? What's wrong? And it's just the way it is. But I think, again, for all the reasons that you just discussed, the markets, the gold and silver markets are really going to take off. Gold's already started breaking out of a 6-year base. Silver's got to get above 21 to do the same thing. And I think you're going to see some fireworks that will make your followers be very happy campers.
Yeah, like I think so. I think we're in for a wonderful ride. At this point, Bill, I would really it's just been a privilege sharing this information tonight with you, and we just thank you so much for the opportunity of interviewing you this evening, and all the work you do with GATA. What I would like, could you share with our viewers, if they would like to know more about GATA and how they could connect with you guys, what would be the best approach for them?
Well, GATA is real simple. Actually, Le Metropole Cafe is too. Chris Powell, my colleague, does a great job putting out a newsletter at www.gata.org. They can sign up right away and get on that list. I have a 2-week free trial for my subscription site, www.lemetropolecafe.com, and people can see if what I put out on a daily basis is of interest. And we've been at it now for over 20 years, and we've got to carry on till we win the day.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Bill. Look, I'd like to think we could do this again. I really do, because I think that we're going to have lots to talk about. I think we're looking forward to an explosive few months and then years ahead. But thank you so much again. Very appreciative of your time. And I'd also like to thank once again our subscribers for their ongoing valued support. So I'd say until next time, stay well, stay focused, and goodbye for now.
Goodbye, Bill.
Goodbye, Bill. Thank you so much.